let's move on to education. This was something, Marshall, you're pretty interested in. I didn't know a lot about it, but the more that I look into it, it actually seemed pretty troubling. So let's put this up there on the screen in terms of what we've got going on here. Bill De Blasio, as one of his last acts of mayor, is actually going to go in and kill the New York City Gifted and Talented program. So what it is that the highly selective program, which was a symbol of what the New York Times says is segregation for incoming students, is now going to be effectively is going to be effectively killed. The people who are inside the program, they said, it will not go away, but new people will not be accepted. Should be clear here, he's making this a matter of policy, but what they say is that Eric Adams would actually have to implement that policy if and when he is elected. I mean, I assume that's going to happen. So what do you make of this whole thing, Marshall? I mean, the New York Times, it seems pretty inflammatory for them to say, literally point to it as a, quote, glaring symbol of segregation in school. They don't even quote somebody whenever they make that claim. I mean, that seems pretty outrageous whenever it comes to what they're claiming here, you know, in terms of, obviously brings up matters of race and more. What do you make of it in terms of what's going on here?
Yeah, most of you know that I recently moved from DC to Brooklyn, so I'm actually, you know, I don't have.
Oh yeah,
kids.
you're
I don't
a constituent.
Yeah. So I'm technically a constituent. I don't have kids or anything, so I'm not quite making decisions about public schooling. But if we're looking back over the past few months of breaking points and stuff we've discussed in the realignment, it's actually crazy how much local schooling has become this hyper important issue. So even if you don't live in New York, even if you're not, you know, even if your kid isn't in a gifted and talented program, a quick statement that should be made to address my own biases. I was tested in 4th grade, did not make it into a gifted and talented program. So maybe there's a set of, you know, deep frustrations there. But here's the thing that is really interesting to me. I hated the use of segregation in the way they're framing this program, because here's the context. Context, if you look at these gifted and talented programs, 75% of these students are Asian or white. This is also much, again, like the debate about schools like Stuyvesant, which are these very elite test admittance-based schools where the actual vast majority of people who attend the schools are actually Asian and are not Black or Hispanic, causing, once again, a conversation about race and equity. And here's the thing, I'm not just trying to dunk on people who are liberal Democrats, like left of center, like the actual conversation about, hey, like, how do we ensure that, especially in public schools, people get proper educations, people have access to resources? That's an incredibly important one. So I'm not trying to come here and say, hey, like everything that was happening in New York City was totally okay. In the article, because once again, like despite the annoying segregation where there's some interesting reporting here, there's all sorts of conversations about how you could modify these programs to make them more equitable. For example, under the status quo, parents have to actually say, hey, I want to have my kid tested.
Okay. So hey, test everybody.
Exactly. That could be a policy that could say, hey, there could obviously be a disparate level of parental engagement. Hey, maybe rather than testing, because they do the testing in kindergarten, we could be like Oregon, where I'm from, and test in 4th grade. You could have a totally fair and honest conversation about these equity points, about the points for there. But the second you throw in segregation, it completely, once again, this goes back to our Facebook conversation, something the two of us are obsessed with. We cover this on the realignment. We cover this here, is what language are we using to describe very complicated public policy programs? The word segregation suggests that there is some person sitting in the New York City Public Schools office just twirling his or her, well, I guess his in this case, mustache, making the statement that, oh, now Asians control the gifted. That's not happening. Like, that segregation in the Deep South was an actual evil plan that was implemented by actual people, and the solution to that actual evil plan was, frankly, to pass laws and to make Supreme Court decisions saying, hey, you cannot literally say Black people go to one school, white people go to another school. In New York, we have this issue where there are disparate levels of access, there are different levels there, but the second you make this about that type of word, you not only mischaracterize the actual issue, but you basically make it so that a politician, in this case Bill De Blasio, could effectively just basically say, hey, we're phasing this out, we now have equity now, everything's fair, we're reducing segregation, but at no point are those metrics he's establishing actually helping us have a deeper conversation of, hey, to quote former President George W. Bush, like, is our children learning? It's actually a very important question, despite the mangled syntax. It actually is an important question of like, hey, like, of those kids who are now going into like less segregated schools, by his statement, are we learning more? Is there more opportunity there? Is a meritocracy, which is a very important part of our country, actually operating?
You know, what's interesting too is put this New York Post thing up there on the screen. When you go ahead and you look in there, there are a lot of quotes in this story from people who are in Queens and representatives from areas with a higher Asian population in New York City itself. And they're outraged by it. So this could absolutely galvanize a pretty engaged segment of the population, to say the least. But like you said, it's not like somebody is out there who is saying, oh, you know what, we're gonna take these whites and Asians and we're gonna separate them from all of these Hispanic black kids and other, poor whites or poor Asians. We're gonna create some sort of bifurcated system. Nobody's saying that. I didn't even know that point about testing. That makes complete sense to me. If I recall, in Texas, everybody was tested. So why don't you just do that? You could just make it so that everybody could be tested and make it so that obviously we would see an increase in equity or whatever, as long as the test is okay. And then, okay, like you said, move the test from kindergarten to 3rd grade or 4th grade. These things have been studied for a long time. The message they're sending is that gifted and talented was inherently racist. And that is where, I just completely, obviously, get off the train. And I see this very much in the vein of some other craziness that we see kind of happening across the nation, where racial outcomes themselves are the sole determinant of what we should be looking at. And yeah, it should be one determinant. It should be a consideration. It should be something, well, if you see 0% of people who are black or whatever, I'm not saying that's the case, who are getting in, you say, hey, what's going on here? We have X amount of population. What can we do? Maybe we could try this or that. But instead, they look at it and they just go, that is inherently terrible. And then they just kill it. And, in terms of the political implications of this is the type of stuff which drives people crazy. I mean, when you start to mess with people's kids and their education, as you're seeing now, some of the hottest protests in the country right now are masks and critical race theory. Masks in particular, I would say like that one. I mean, I've never seen school parent-teacher conferences or whatever like that before. Critical race theory, obviously, and whichever way you fall on that, people feel real hot and they go and they go to the mat for it. People getting recalled on school boards and more. This is the same type of thing, Marshall, where you could absolutely see some sort, I don't even necessarily think it would be a Republican, because some of the people I'm seeing here quoted who are protesting are actually Democrats who represent a lot of Asians. To be clear,
this is New York City.
Right.
Everyone we're talking about is operationally liberal here.
Right, but so there, from what I see is, this is just sets another perfect, if I'm Eric Adams, it's one of the first things that I do in order to try and reverse. If I'm Eric Adams, one of the very first things I'm gonna be like, hey, you know what, that was stupid. We're gonna do what you said, which is that we're gonna test everybody and have all this, and brilliant NYC is going to be our thing.
Well, here's what's interesting about that. And this is the part which is super difficult here. Eric Adams, once again, Eric Adams is, I think, despite everything, a very good actual politician, keeping his ear down to the ground. Eric Adams has spoken up in favor of the Gifted and Talented program.
Yeah, there you go.
Here is the thing, though, and this is why you probably just can't just say we're going to reverse it. The guidance is already out. So the way it works is this year's incoming cohort of Gifted and Talented students are going to be the last cohort. So when it comes to these testing questions, the system's been set up. And once again, he hasn't even technically been elected mayor yet. So this has happened. So the broader takeaway that I want people to really think about here is, as we are going into these really hyperpolarized, actually for once localized debate, no one's bringing in, this is like a Trump thing or this is like a Joe Biden thing. This is actually this very specific issue. As we are looking at these complicated issues, as like the country's demographics like actually change, we should say to ourselves, hey, like, is the word segregation particularly useful when we're talking about majority of Asian immigrant students here? Is that quite it? Because I don't think it actually is. No, I don't just think, I know that's not actually it. There is a different, better word. There's a different, better faith framework, because you cannot have the message. The number one thing that I saw people just pushing out on Twitter when they saw this story, because, look, it's Twitter, people aren't going into the nuance here. The message seemed to be to folks that, wow, like New York City just is totally given up on meritocracy. New York City doesn't care about excellence. New York City doesn't want to offer people who are working really hard, oftentimes are immigrants, the actual opportunity to level themselves up. that is the wrong takeaway. And if you are a person, if you are a part of the left part of this audience, and you actually wake up every day thinking that like equity, racial equality are the number one issues you care about, you do not want to have the reaction that people have to these sort of policies, be like, wow, like New York City just doesn't care about merit. That is the last thing you want this national hyperpolarized electorate to see your policies through.
No, I completely agree, and I think it is going to be a big problem for them in the future, especially if Adams can't reverse it.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it, you get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.